look at Saudi Arabia. They're an ally and they're a tremendous purchaser.
They want us to survive and to
talk about it on American television.
Why are these trees leaning?
You're gonna find the leakers. We're gonna find the leakers. They're gonna pay a big price for leaking.
The Trump administration inched forward in its hunt for leakers, charging an employee of the Treasury Department with giving confidential information to a reporter. An 18-page filing accused Natalie Mayflower Sowers Edwards of sharing reports of suspicious financial activity. While the complaint doesn't name who she sent them to, it cites headlines matching articles by BuzzFeed on the financial dealings of Paul Manafort and others linked to the special prosecutor's probe. More than 45 years after the U.S. left the Bien Hoa Air Base in Vietnam, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis toured the site that will host the largest ever U.S. cleanup of Agent Orange, at a cost of $390 million. The Army used the base to store the herbicide. A recent sample shows its soil is 1,000 times more toxic than international limits, and a study says it's spreading to nearby lakes and creeks. Canada legalized recreational marijuana, making good on one of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's campaign promises. But not everyone will have the same freedom to light up in public. Provinces and territories each set their own rules. The Senate may be on recess, but the Senate Judiciary Committee still held a hearing for a controversial nominee to the Federal Appeals Court, and no Democrats showed up to question Allison Jones Rushing. At 36 years old, with 8 years of experience practicing law, she could spend decades on the Fourth Circuit. It's a lifetime appointment.
You're a rock star. But I think to be a really good federal judge, you got to have some life experience.
The Turkish government has told the media that it has recordings that prove exactly what happened to Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate. That is, he was tortured, killed, and dismembered in rapid succession. Many world leaders are outraged at the Saudi regime. So far, President Trump seems like he's still processing the situation, and he's viewing it through a personal lens.
So Saudi Arabia, and they have, I can only say, I've been here for almost 2 years, they've been a great ally to me. To me.
Yes, Saudi Arabia has been an important American partner for a long time. That would make responding to the Khashoggi murder difficult enough. But demanding accountability from Riyadh could be even harder for Trump because he's been financially involved with the Saudis for years. We know this because he's been talking about it since the 1980s.
They buy the most expensive apartments in the world that I happen to build. And I know the people, and I like the people.
In the early 90s, Trump sold a yacht to a Saudi prince. In 2001, the Saudis bought an entire floor in Trump World Tower near the United Nations. And during the primary season in 2015, he was still talking about how much real estate the Saudis like to buy from him.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me, they spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
The conversation around the president's conflicts of interest has been going on since before he took office. It comes up a lot, and we've covered it a lot. But now it's more concrete, and questions about whether the president is acting in the country's best interest or his own are impossible to avoid, and his opponents are going to make hay out of that. Today, 11 Senate Democrats sent a letter to Trump demanding that he disclose all of his family's financial ties to the kingdom. That's not going to happen, but the headache isn't going to go away either. For anyone in government at a level below the presidency, how to deal with this problem is kind of obvious. I posed a hypothetical about that to Noah Bookbinder at Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. Let's say he worked in Treasury. How would the Treasury Department handle your role in this?
I mean, the appropriate way to handle that would be recusal.
There are people in the government who do recuse themselves from certain things.
Even at the Treasury Department, probably ethics officials would say there's too much potential for conflict. You should still sell your interest. But let's say they didn't. An ethics official would look at this and hopefully they'd say, there's too much possible conflict here. You shouldn't work on this. You should recuse yourself. The president can't do that.
And he did try to get ahead of this. Way back in January of 2017, he brought out a lawyer to explain how he wasn't going to be involved in his businesses anymore.
Through the trust agreement, he has relinquished leadership and management of the Trump Organization to his sons, Don and Eric, and a longtime Trump executive, Alan Weisselberg.
What he didn't do was divest. So in the future, he could still benefit, and his family is still benefiting from foreign deals they already had.
So the solution is not to put yourself in this position, is not to have those business interests. If a court were to rule that the president is violating the Constitution and cannot accept foreign business, then a court could order him to do something about that. That's one thing that could cause some real movement here. Another would be a change of heart from the president, who realizes that he's in an untenable situation, decides to do something about it. We haven't seen anything resembling a sign from him that that is likely. The other way that something could happen is that the American people could decide that this is unacceptable and act on that in the decisions that they make.
Christopher is a former bike racer and photographer who's now a metal worker. Chris, his roommate in Brooklyn, New York, is a theatre director. But a year ago, they took a break from their jobs and went to Syria to fight the Islamic State.
Hey, Nugget.
He will attempt to make himself the center of attention. That's kind of what he does.
Someone reading Hamlet?
You'll see it's inscribed from a comrade of ours. He found it in rubble in Raqqa.
How did reading Shakespeare go down in Syria?
It's fine. I read the whole canon. I read every single one of them, and the sonnets and all of them.
What does your life look like now? What are you guys doing?
I get up very early, and I walk my dog, and I go to work. I think it looks suspiciously like a normal life.
Sounds pretty normal to me.
But girls, they wanna have fun. Oh.
Official American involvement in Raqqa was limited to airstrikes and small teams of elite special forces. But a socialist Kurdish militia group, the YPG, which was doing a lot of the fighting on the ground, welcomed far less experienced fighters from abroad.
But there's a bunch of internationals here, which is great. I've met a lot of people that are really cool.
Including Chris and Christopher, who first met in the YPG's ranks. Christopher says he knew of 3 entire units of foreigners fighting for the YPG.
Shaheen, who is smoking while running right now.
Over dinner, we asked the 2 Brooklynites to justify why they decided to fight for a non-state actor in a foreign war.
How do you go about doing it?
You Google it. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
It's like the first result. First of all, you have to apply. When I expressed interest, when I wrote that email, they sent back a questionnaire asking about my political beliefs, my past. They said, you will be fighting in the bloodiest war on the planet. Be sure that you are committed to this.
Going over there for 6 months out of a 7-year-long civil war that continues to grind on, is that not more hassle for the YPG versus help?
It was good for them for propaganda. It was good for them ideologically to demonstrate that there is international solidarity, and that doesn't just come from the coalition and their bombers.
They want us to survive. They want us to have seen what they're really doing and to
talk about it on American television.
That's our real contribution, much more than a military way.
So Jihad, what are in your magazine pouches? This one has a combat application tourniquet and a Kalashnikov magazine. These are hand grenades, and this one has Skittles.
Had you held a gun before going out there?
I was a Boy Scout. People in my family have had guns my whole life. Firearms weren't unfamiliar to me. Yikes.
What were you actually doing out there? What did day-to-day life look like?
You're in a position, and Dash is there, and maybe they're in this building there, and you're in this building there. Someone at all times has to be watching those other buildings, looking out through a little hole in concrete with sandbags around you. Every once in a while, something happens, and there's a firefight, there's an airstrike, there's something going on. Most of the time, it's super boring.
They see them with the scopes. These guys see them.
How many people did you kill?
I don't know.
You don't know if you hit anyone?
Right. So everything in front of you is Dash. And you see a window pane move So you start to pay attention to it. The next time it closes, you put 3 bullets through. It doesn't open again. Did you kill anybody?
What about you?
It doesn't matter to me whether I killed anyone or not. I went there to help win a war, and that is incidentally often done by killing people, but I didn't go to kill anyone.
How much of the Battle of Raqqa were you guys there for?
Like 2 or 3 months, like the end. I was in the city when, like, the liberation was announced, when the Daesh surrender occurred.
I stood on that ground that had been a slave market for women. You know, I saw those cells where they had tortured people, and we collectively stopped that.
I'm gonna have to wear my belt. Oh, you're a saint. Thanks, buddy.
Today, well into the war's 7th year, almost all the YPG's foreign volunteers have gone home or been killed. Christopher and Chris left Syria after the battle in Raqqa just before Christmas last year.
What was it like coming back through US security? Is it really that easy to just go to Syria for a few months and then pop back?
I walked into the United States. They stamped my passport. They said, "Welcome home."
They didn't ask you where you'd been?
Nobody asked at all.
So far, the US government hasn't taken any action against the returned YPG volunteers. The Department of Justice told Vice News that it would have to review each individual case before determining whether anyone broke the law, but called traveling abroad to fight, quote, a really bad idea, and said, "We strongly discourage it."
Why? Why did you head over there?
I found out about the Rojava Revolution when Rolling Stone published an article about international volunteers. I believed in the political and social goals that they were, trying to structure their new society around. And also, Daesh is objectively the bad guy. The only reason that I personally wouldn't go would be cowardice.
Was it not also because it sounded like an adventure? Looked like fun?
Not really.
Was the prospect of being a hero?
No. I mean, I was totally...
There was no part of you that was like, this will be fun, this will be an adventure. This will be something that I'll think about for the rest of my life.
No, I thought I might die.
I live here and you're blocking the door.
What unit?
I don't need to tell you that. What unit?
Last Friday, a white woman in St. Louis tried to block a black man from entering the building where he lived, followed him to his apartment door,
And
you see my keys in the door.
and then called the police. She said his presence made her uncomfortable. It was just the latest example of an all-too-common phenomenon. White people calling the cops on black people who were just minding their own business.
I get these types of calls anywhere between 1 to 10 times a shift. And we work anywhere between 12 to 16-hour shifts.
The common denominator in all the calls was that it was a black male in a community that was typically predominantly white.
What's terrible is that they can opt to be anonymous when they call it in. So they can do he doesn't belong here, or that person is walking around, they seem really suspicious, something's going on. Did you want contact? No. And they would block their numbers when they call. And he is directing us to do his bidding. That shit really pissed me off. You do the job long enough, you can read between the lines between what the dispatcher is writing and what's truly being said.
The first thing I would always do is immediately tell them, I'm here because someone called 911 to report you as being a suspicious person. I wanted them to understand that I had no choice but to be there to talk to them because someone else had called 911. I had received a call when I was working in Metro Atlanta about a person who was trespassing at a private pond. It was stocked with fish, and only residents and their guests were allowed to fish at the pond. As I pulled up, the gentleman walked over to me. He asked if I was there because of him, when I told him that I had received a call that he wasn't allowed to be fishing there. And he pointed to his house. You could see his house from the pond. He said, I've lived here for several years, and this is not the first time that my neighbors have called on me.
The one that'll always stick out in my mind is a gentleman that used to walk every morning. Every morning, like clockwork, 5 a.m., he'd grab his walking stick and he'd go for a walk And like clockwork, by 5:15, he'd be passing a specific point in his route. Somebody would call, and they would contact 911, and they would report a black male wearing all black, carrying a baseball bat. And to them, it was suspicious activity. All of us know who this person is, know him by their first name. We'll call him Jerry, and know it's not a bat that he's carrying. And we'll send officers out there. Officers would relay that it's probably Jerry, but we'll go out there and check it out just to be sure. Officers would go out there and they would say, everything is fine, it's Jerry. Jerry's out there doing his walk. I'm not sure if Jerry moved or if officers just told him to stop making that route, but we stopped getting calls and we stopped sending officers out.
One account that really sticks with me to this day and it pisses me off is the patrolmen, we had access to our patrol cars and we would drive them to training. Well, we had several officers in our agency who were black. And one day, it was in the late afternoon, and a call came in and said, hey, to let you know there's a black man driving one of your cars, and so it's probably stolen. And it was anonymous, it was blocked. So dispatch figured out really quick with GPS which car they were talking about. He's black and he was wearing plain clothes because that's what the training calls for that day. I'll never forget that, just the plain racism. Kind of made jokes afterwards. We should send one of our other black officers to go make contact with that person, and see if everything was okay with them. But, they were anonymous, so we couldn't do it.
Is this permafrost we're walking on now?
Yes. We're on top of intact permafrost on a hillock, and as we walk down, this area is actually starting to collapse.
Dr. Charles Miller is a climate scientist at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. He's studying permafrost, Arctic soil that's thawing as the planet warms and causing havoc in the boreal forests of Alaska. He took us to an area just outside Fairbanks, where the ground is starting to melt.
So as we walk through here, you'll notice that, number one, as we get in here, the terrain becomes quite squishy, and this is the active layer beginning to thaw out underneath what we're standing on.
It's like jumping on a mattress, kind of.
Yes, it's very spongy.
A lot of give.
And you can see all the vegetation comes down with it.
Why are these trees leaning?
The permafrost that had been giving them firm structure underneath has degraded, it's thawed out underneath, and so it's collapsing. I'm now down in the bottom of this drainage gully, and you can begin to see how the soil is even falling away through here. This kind of abrupt erosion, as you can see, is causing the trees to tilt in. The forest could eventually collapse on itself, and this will change rather dramatically in the next decade or so.
Areas like this, where permafrost is melting, are scattered throughout northern Alaska, making them hard to study at scale. But Dr. Miller is doing just that. He's leading a NASA team called the Arctic Boreal Vulnerability Experiment. These scientists fly a jet loaded with sophisticated laser sensors over the Alaskan tundra to monitor changes in the permafrost.
Flaps are set. Trim is 12. Checked.
Why is it important to measure that active layer of permafrost?
We have seen over the last 30 or 40 years that the temperature in the permafrost is rising dramatically.
In fact, last year was the hottest winter on record in the Arctic. And from the air, you can see where changes are starting to happen.
When the permafrost thaws and the ice in the permafrost vanishes, frequently what happens is there's a large subsidence or lowering of the ground surface. That provides a very convenient place for water to collect. So you will see, as if by magic, new lakes and ponds appear across the Arctic every year.
While the Great Thaw is yet another indicator of climate change, the concern about what's happening here goes much deeper than that. As the permafrost thaws, microbes start digesting that carbon and releasing CO2 and methane, two major greenhouse gases, into the atmosphere. Just last week, the UN's climate panel rang the alarm bell about the impact this release will have on global warming.
There's approximately 1,000 billion metric tons of organic carbon in the top 3 meters of soil in the permafrost. To put that in context, there's approximately 350 billion tons of carbon that's been released into the atmosphere from all of the human activity since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So about 3 times that amount is in those top 3 meters of permafrost soils.
If even a portion of that carbon gets released, it could be devastating to the planet. And if global temperatures rise, as a UN panel predicts, Dr. Miller says that sudden permafrost thaw could be imminent.
It might happen sooner rather than later, and it might happen faster than we're currently expecting.
Hi, I'm kurtvile, and this is me dissecting bass-ackwards.
Then everything went backwards with words coming at bass-ackwards.
To be honest, when I wrote bass-ackwards, I was down the shore and I was coming out of it, but I was definitely having some sort of meltdown. Drinking lots of alcohol to like calm me down. Not necessarily an ideal way you want to always calm yourself down. So the song is really like sort of coming out of a place of you know, some kind of anxiety pushing down on your brains or whatever. We started just on a drum machine that Sean Everett, who recorded this song and mixed it and everything. He just hammered out this simple beat on his phone. We had this girl, Barbara Gruska, and she's an incredible drummer. She probably did the ultimate compliment to this song when she listened back. She was like, oh, that's transportive. If it took you somewhere, if it took you to outer space and back or something, that's a good thing. We pushed up to 2 acoustic guitars and made sure they were definitely running the show. That's the roots, that's the foundation. There's all the grooves in the guitar, you know, and the hypnosis is in the acoustic guitar. There's a backwards guitar. Every time I said bass-ackwards, I wanted to just have a loop pedal play in reverse, like the Beatles and other people done before me, but the harp, my friend Mary Lattimore, just got this way with melody. It sounds like a little piano in the background. It's not too loud in the mix. It's subliminal melody. Like the world's at a boiling point. Now with computers, everybody sees everything that's going on. Like it's like a massive static. Well, moving forward, they're going backwards. Let's go outside, walk through the woods, get out of your chair.